When Vladimir Putin initiated the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, his strategic calculus was rooted in a swift, overwhelming military victory. The assumption was that the sheer force of Russian armor and troop numbers would compel a rapid capitulation. Even after the initial failure of this blitzkrieg, the Kremlin operated under the belief that its vast resources and the perceived loyalty of its populace would allow it to systematically grind down Ukrainian resistance. What the Russian leadership fundamentally failed to anticipate was the emergence of a pervasive, decentralized, and increasingly effective internal opposition. This resistance, composed of both Ukrainians in occupied territories and Russian citizens opposed to the war, is now waging a shadow war that is eroding the Kremlin's control and strategic stability from within. A December 2nd report by Euromaidan Press highlights the severity of this internal challenge, detailing a growing network of resistance movements operating in the shadows. These groups are characterized by their patience, their deep local knowledge, and their willingness to strike at opportune moments. Their operations span from the occupied regions of Ukraine deep into the Russian heartland, demonstrating a reach and coordination that the traditional Russian military and intelligence apparatus appear incapable of countering. The attacks, which have spread from Melitopol to Moscow, suggest a level of underground organization that has become virtually impossible for Putin's security services to contain. The surge in partisan activity throughout November 2025 serves as a stark illustration of the network's extensive reach and operational maturity. The genesis of this shadow war is often traced back to the occupied territories, with Melitopol's serving as a primary hub of partisan activity. Despite being under Russian control almost since the war's inception, the region remains a cauldron of resistance. Euromaidan Press documented a recent attempt by partisans to detonate a vehicle transporting a Russian drone crew, an operation that, though it narrowly failed due to a technical malfunction, underscored the persistent threat. This incident follows a successful car bombing in October 2023, which resulted in the deaths of several Russian personnel, an event Russia attempted to dismiss as a mere short circuit. The reality is that these partisans have been active for years, forcing Russia to acknowledge the problem through heavy-handed judicial responses. In June 2025, Pravda Dosak reported the sentencing of a family in Melitopol, a man, his wife, and his mother, to terms ranging from 20 years to life imprisonment for alleged collaboration with Ukraine and involvement in railway sabotage. This rare success for Russian counter-partisan efforts did little to deter the broader movement. Just days after the failed November car bombing, saboteurs in occupied Luhansk executed a more successful operation. Operating in a region Russia claims to control almost entirely, the partisans managed to plant and detonate explosives under 2 Russian military vehicles, killing 4 Russian soldiers. This incident mirrors a similar car bombing in the Kherson Chyororuz region in May, which targeted and killed 4 pro-Russian Chechen officers. This recurring pattern reveals a sophisticated partisan strategy focused on identifying high-value Russian military vehicles and personnel, gaining access to them, and deploying explosives with lethal precision. The resistance is not solely focused on kinetic attacks. Intelligence gathering forms a critical, equally vital component of their operations. In Crimea, a region under Russian occupation since 2014, infiltrators successfully recorded fighter jets taking off from the Saki airbase. This seemingly simple act provided Ukrainian intelligence, HUR, with real-time visibility into Russian flight patterns, revealing which aircraft are operational and their typical deployment routes. This information is invaluable, as it allows Ukraine to anticipate Russian responses to drone assaults and, more critically, to identify specific, high-value targets for future long-range strikes. The coordinated nature of these operations, where intelligence gathered in Crimea can inform a missile strike weeks later, highlights the deep operational link between the partisans and Ukraine's main intelligence agencies, such as the SHUR, Defense Intelligence of Ukraine. As the narrative suggests, the underground groups are not acting in isolation. They are receiving guidance on what information is needed and how to securely transmit it to the armed forces. This collaboration adds a layer of complexity to Putin's internal security problem, demonstrating that the resistance is a sophisticated, integrated element of Ukraine's overall war effort. The strategic calculus for Russia is simple. Every successful partisan operation, whether sabotage or intelligence gathering, forces the Russian command to divert resources, delay planned assaults, or cancel them entirely, resulting in a win for Ukraine regardless of the immediate outcome. The most alarming development for the Kremlin is the expansion of partisan activity into the Russian Federation itself. This signifies that the resistance is no longer confined to occupied Ukrainian territory, but is actively supported by Russian citizens willing to commit acts of betrayal against their own state. This internal front is proving to be a critical vulnerability for the Russian war machine. In November 2025, a series of coordinated operations inside Russia mirrored the actions in occupied Ukraine. On November 5th, Ukraine's Special Operations Forces, SSO, confirmed a joint operation with the Russian partisan group, Black Spark. This group successfully destroyed a transport and reloading vehicle for the Iskander Tachai ballistic missile system near Ikshan, Kursk. The Iskander is one of Russia's most potent and feared weapons, and the destruction of its support vehicle significantly complicates Russia's ability to launch its stockpile of approximately 600 missiles from border regions. Simultaneously, Black Spark is also credited with taking out a Harmonia radar in the same region, which supports local air defenses Ikasurin. This dual-pronged attack, crippling a strike asset and blinding the air defense, is a classic example of a coordinated strategy designed to open aerial corridors for future Ukrainian drone and missile attacks deeper into Russian territory. The sabotage did not stop in Kursk. Just 4 days later, Pravda reported that partisans had successfully destroyed 4 military logistics facilities across the Yei, Bashkortostan, and Vologda, Urlin regions. This included a series of arson attacks targeting communication towers and a railway relay cabinet. Russia's logistical network, which relies heavily on railways to move troops and equipment to the front, is a prime target. The destruction of a relay cabinet, even if temporary, causes significant disruption, while the loss of communication towers hinders the coordination of Russian forces on their own soil, ultimately weakening their offensive capabilities in Ukraine. The sheer volume and geographical spread of these incidents, stretching from Moscow to Irkutsk, have forced the Kremlin into a state of systematic denial. Euromaidan Press notes that local officials are consistently describing these acts of sabotage, which include setting fire to electrical panels, relay boxes, and railway infrastructure, as unexplained technical failures. This official narrative of denial is a desperate attempt by the Kremlin to control the domestic perception of the war. By refusing to acknowledge the existence of an internal resistance, Putin attempts to maintain the illusion of total control and national unity. However, the frequency of these acts is making the lie increasingly difficult to sustain. The most significant strike near the capital occurred on November 1st, when the HUR claimed responsibility for a devastating drone strike against the Uno-E Ring pipeline near Moscow, Arteoten. This pipeline is a critical artery, transporting up to 3 million tons of jet fuel, gasoline, and diesel daily for the Russian armed forces. While the strike itself was conducted by drones, Euromaidan Press suggests a strong possibility that local infiltrators provided the necessary intelligence, photographs, coordinates, or real-time surveillance to enable the precision attack. This echoes the intelligence gathering in Crimea and demonstrates the deep reach of the shadow network into the most heavily guarded regions of Russia. The current state of the shadow war is the culmination of years of overlooked dissent. As early as March 2024, Ada Blakewell of Novaya Gazeta 11 warned that Putin's focus on silencing vocal critics had led him to ignore the nascent underground resistance. This movement began with simple acts of defiance, such as wearing green ribbons and communicating online to express anti-war sentiment. Over time, this discontent evolved into a tangible movement. Blakewell reported that these groups began creating underground workshops using technologies like 3D printing to produce tools for sabotage, engaging in cyber espionage, and organizing anti-war lectures. By February 2025, the On-Atlantic Council BAT confirmed the existence of a full-blown shadow army in occupied Ukraine, composed of civil resistance activists, partisans, and military special forces units. This network, active in regions like Crimea and Luhansk, is now working directly with Ukrainian intelligence to maximize its effectiveness. The same type of movement is growing in Russia, leading to what AKLED AOE13 described in November 2025 as the evolution of isolated domestic sabotage into a full-scale proxy war. AKLED's analysis charts the evolution of these acts. The first year saw arson attacks targeting recruitment offices, often motivated by self-preservation, avoiding conscription. By 2025, groups like Atesh in occupied territories and Freedom of Russia Legion, FRL, inside Russia are focused on strategic military targets. Atesh, a pro-Ukrainian militia from Crimea, is responsible for nearly half of the 30 documented sabotage operations in occupied territories in 2025. 13. The FRL, composed of Russian citizens fighting for Ukraine, focuses on hitting key sites like rail and telecommunications equipment, often exploiting the fact that their Russian citizenship allows them to slip through borders undetected. 14. Putin's enforced Russification of occupied Ukraine, which granted Russian citizenship to residents of Crimea, has ironically provided the resistance with a crucial operational advantage. The ultimate goal of this shadow war is not to end the conflict with a single decisive blow, but to inflict damage at inopportune moments, slowly bleeding Russia's military resources and disrupting its strategic planning. Euromaidan Press summarizes the dual impact. Along the front, resistance groups are disrupting logistics, collecting intelligence, and forcing Russian units to divert manpower away from combat. In the deep rear, strikes against railways, communications, and energy infrastructure expose structural weaknesses that Moscow cannot secure without further stretching its forces. This powerful combination of tactical disruption and strategic intelligence gathering is forcing Putin to confront an opposition that is far larger and more terrifying to an authoritarian regime than he ever imagined. The freedom of Russia, Legions for instance, has become a major thorn in the Kremlin side, carrying out daring strikes that cripple locomotives and disrupt the vital railway network. 15. Russia's rear, once considered a safe haven, is now a zone of vulnerability, threatened by long-range drones, missiles, and most critically, by its own citizens. Putin's failure to address the growth of these movements early on has resulted in a shadow war that is actively undermining the very foundation of his war effort, proving that the greatest threat to his regime may not be on the front lines, but deep within his own borders.